Rouse's is proud of the creativity and the unparalleled entertainment in New Orleans, and honored to highlight it with their sponsorship of Steppin Out on WYES.
"35 years, a Steppin Out special." And now, here's host Peggy Scott Laborde.
And you have just heard the golden tones of Andrea, our longtime station announcer. Good evening, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde. Welcome to Steppin Out. We are celebrating 35 years of our show, which spotlights the New Orleans area's dining arts and entertainment scenes. With us, Poppy Tooker, of course, the host and author of Louisiana Eats, the show heard on WWNO radio. Hey, Poppy.
Hello, Peg.
Good to see you.
Honored to be here.
Thank you. And you have been with us almost 15 years.
Incredible.
Thank you. Woohoo. Alfred Richard, who covers the local movie and TV production scene for WWL-TV and for us for almost a decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy.
Doug MacCash, who reports on the arts and culture scenes for the Times-Picayune, of course, and New Orleans Advocate, hoping you will be with us for a very long time. And Alan Smason of theatercriticism.com and editor of the Crescent City Jewish News, on Steppin Out for a decade. Thank you so much. And we want to thank our friend Dominic Massa for this beautiful anniversary cake. We've got this great cake, and we are so thrilled. Look at that. It's gorgeous with our 35th anniversary logo. Wow. Well, let us begin by taking a look at the first Steppin Out, which was on WLAE-TV. The program debuted on March the 19th, 1986, St. Joseph's Day, and has been on WYES for 33 and a half years. Let's take a look.
Good evening, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde, and welcome to Steppin Out. Each week we'll try to provide some analysis and commentary and maybe a little humor on the local arts community and the local arts scene. And tonight we have with us Tom Fitzmaurice, publisher of...
And that's the most humor you're going to get.
Right, that's it. And we have Rick Barton, movie critic for Gambit newspaper. Also with us is Amy Wharton, who is Gambit's arts reporter, and Mr. Al Shea, columnist for New Orleans Magazine. And thank you all for being with us. And before we all talk...
Wow. Tom Fitzmaurice, of course, and his wife, Mary Ann, they continue to do the food show on WGSO. That's on 990. And also they do the New Orleans Menu newsletter. Rick Barton, of course, is writer-residence at UNO in the English department, and he created the creative writing program at UNO. And Amy Wharton went on to write for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and of course, we lost our beloved Al Shea in 2009. So, back over to Poppy. Poppy, tell us about the last 35 years.
Well, you know, Peggy, I don't know what you and Emeril did after you shot that first show, but in 1986, here are some of the highlights of where you could have dined out. You could have gone to LaRuth's, or Corinne Dunbar's, or Marty's, on Rampart Street, and Lenfant's, Cobb's. I know that was a favorite for you. You could have had seafood at Fitzgerald's on the lakefront. You could have had a little soul food at Chez Helene with Austin Leslie. And, you know, after all that celebration, you could have had breakfast on the way home from the party at the Hummingbird Grill. Can you imagine? Now, Peg, we also, though, in 1986, lost Restaurant Jonathan. That was a real landmark with Tom Cowman before he went uptown to the Upper Line. And Peg, we lost Bali High that year, too, which I know is so near and dear to your heart. What happened for you there, Peggy?
I'm so glad you asked. We had our wonderful wedding reception there, as a matter of fact.
Incredible. Well, if we go back to 1986, we also have to give a shout out to Paul Prudhomme, who of course we lost in 2015, but he was really in his heyday at K. Paul's then. And in 1986, that was also the year that Paul and Kay Prudhomme persuaded Frank and Marna Brightston to open Brightston's restaurant in the Riverbend, where he's carrying on still today. Now, another landmark chef who followed Paul Prudhomme into the kitchen was, of course, Emeril Lagasse. He was next in the door at Commander's after Paul's departure in '82. He was just there for 7.5 years before he opened Emeril's, beginning his great national restaurant dynasty. Now, many people may not remember Chef Jamie Shannon. He followed Emeril into that kitchen, but Jamie was there for just a few years because he tragically died of cancer at the age of 40 and left his good buddy, Torrey McPhail, to take over, who ended up being the longest tenured chef. 27 years Torrey was there. And recently, in October of last year, Meg Bickford became the first ever female chef to take the helm. Now, back in those days, if we were to say, let's go have some coffee, we might have been talking about Cafe au Lait. That was kind of the choice. Morning Call, Cafe du Monde. Now, Phyllis Jordan did have PJ's Coffee. She had the original on Maple Street, and she was also at her second one on Magazine Street. Phyllis was serving iced coffee, and believe it or not, that was a total phenomenon. She was the first one to really get that ball rolling, and kudos to Phyllis. Now, how about breweries and distilleries? Well, there was still Dixie Beer on Tulane Avenue, but there was no Jack's Beer, there was no Falstaff. Now, of course, today, Dixie belongs to Gail Benson, and she recently changed the name to Faubourg. But now there are breweries, brew pubs, and microbreweries in virtually every neighborhood of the city. There's 3 scattered along Tchoupitoulas from Uptown to the Mississippi River Bridge alone. And there were no distilleries in the city at all. And now the city's peppered with them. From, well, Old New Orleans rum started in 1995. And then my personal favorite, Love's 7-3 Distillery on North Claiborne. And there's even a distillery that's also a restaurant, Lulu's on St. Charles Avenue, where you can get your vodka very, very fresh. And remarkably, the Sazerac House has opened in the last couple of years, and they are distilling Sazerac rye right there on Canal Street at Magazine. And of course, we have to think about New Orleans' classic bars, landmarks from the old Absinthe House to the Carousel Lounge. But you know, 1986 was a very interesting year because we were watching the sunset on that ever-popular Fern Bar concept, and the dawn of the wine bar was here with Flagons. Remember Flagons?
Yes.
Opened up in 1983, and it was the place to be in 1986. Now, we're going to fast forward to the other big life-changing moment, Hurricane Katrina, that happened to us all. It was the big restart. We had a clean slate. Everybody had to start over. It took some years to come back, but I know people will remember celebrating every reopening victory. Big ones in particular on New Year's Eve 2005, when Antoine's and Brightston's both reopened. I remember adjusting to the physical changes at Mandina, because Mandina's, the look really shocked me when the whole inside was so different, but the food was the same, which made me feel much better once I had some turtle soup. Once I had a little turtle soup. And, you know, think about it. There were no food trucks until after Katrina. There were no food halls. There were no pop-ups. That's all post-Katrina. And Katrina taught us survival skills. We learned to change and adapt. And of course, with COVID, we've had all sorts of new challenges, but it's feeling similar in some way. And it's too soon to predict what's going to stay with us from this time, what's changed forever, or what's coming back. But I sure am glad to be here with you, Peggy.
Thank you, and we are too. And just to acknowledge, since we're talking about the past, that over the years, Lauren Godin and John Demers helped us with food coverage. And Tom, the only reason also that Tom left is because the time on his radio show had changed, so he couldn't be with us, but we're so glad that Poppy is. And now let's move over, though, to Alfred Richard about his favorite movies.
You know, Peggy, when listening to Poppy talking about the past, especially in the 80s and such, that's really when my love for movies really developed. And I went to UNO, University of New Orleans, and Rick Barton was, of all things, one of my professors at UNO. So I feel honored in stepping into his shoes in talking about movies. One of the films that I watched in that time, because back in the 80s, if you wanted to see first-run theaters, yes, there was a Lakeside. Yes, there was a Lakeside Theater, the GNC, and also the Lakeside Cinema across on Veterans. But if you want to see a film like the one I'm going to talk about, the first one, you'd have to go to either the Britannia Uptown, there was only one Britannia Uptown, or the Pit. That's right, there was a Pit Cinema on Elysian Fields near UNO, and right next to it was a Taco Tico, so really it was like an interesting combination there. But the first film I want to talk about is a New Orleans classic, not filmed completely in New Orleans, but it has that New Orleans feel. Of course, A Streetcar Named Desire. The film, directed by Elia Kazan, came out in 1951. But of course, the great performances of Marlon Brando and Vivian Lee, and we all know Stella! We all know the call there. Now, the thing about this film is there are only a few scenes from actually New Orleans. A lot of this, of course, was done on a soundstage. But the scenes in the beginning where Vivian Lee is trying to get the streetcar named Desire, and she's down at the front end of Canal Street, and I didn't know that there was a train station there where you could catch a train and also
Illinois
streetcar.
Central, yes.
Illinois
Can you imagine? Illinois Central, yes.
So I learned that while watching that film at UNO. It was part of that film appreciation that learned into film theory and criticism.
Okay.
Then we move on to a film that moved into the 1980s, and truly a 1980s film, Paul Schrader directing Cat People. Now, this is a remake of a film starring Simone, but this one had Natasha Kinski. It was shot in the newly renovated Audubon Zoo, but it was called the New Orleans Zoo for some reason, and it still had elements of the old zoo, people in cage, animals in cages. I still remember seeing polar bears in New Orleans at that zoo, but Natasha Kinski, Malcolm McDowell, it was sort of a erotic thriller, but it started the idea of filmmakers coming to New Orleans to make more than just maybe one shot, in which this started the idea of making films in New Orleans long before what we called Hollywood South. Then we were talking about Katrina, and this is a film that I mark as a turning point for Hollywood South. Before the storm, movie and television production was really rolling. Then came Katrina, and it looked like it was going to die out, and there were some concerns. You may remember there were even some national legislature people, Congress critters, who were saying, oh, let's not rebuild New Orleans. Yeah, right. But it was Denzel Washington who decided he wanted to make a film centered in New Orleans, and it was filmed in New Orleans, even in the aftermath of Katrina, and it used the backdrop of Katrina damage. That film was Deja Vu. Sort of a science fiction type in which Denzel Washington plays a cop who can go back in time to investigate a crime of a young woman that he finds fascinating in the video footage that he's recalling. And it showed New Orleans, yes, at its worst, but it also showed New Orleans and showed Hollywood that New Orleans was ready to make a comeback. And the comeback it did. And one of the films that led that comeback was done by part New Orleanian Brad Pitt. And this is one that started the Oscar movement, I guess you could say the resurgence of Hollywood South, and that is A Curious Case of Benjamin Button, the film in which Brad Pitt plays a man who is born old. And he is reversing in his life, and he gets younger as his life goes on toward the end of his life. Also starring Cate Blanchett as well. This one showed New Orleans, and it also had some elements, again, around Hurricane Katrina, but it showed that we were back. And after that, then, of course, Hollywood South really kicked in. We had filmmakers from across the country and around the world who decided that New Orleans was viable once more. And the biggest one is the one that I really like, my fifth film, and that is 12 Years a Slave. This is the film that won the Oscars for, won Oscar nominations for Chiwetel Ejiofor, an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for Lupita Nyong'o. It was shot mostly in Louisiana and the New Orleans area. I was even in a part of this film.
Oh, boy.
Unfortunately, I fainted because of the heat and the costumes out in the field. But this showed New Orleans was back, and now, even after COVID, we're seeing that Hollywood South is starting to resurrect. You can't kill off this golden goose.
Thank you so much, Alfred. And before we move over to Doug, here is the opening sequence to the first Steppin' Out on WYES, January 8th, 1988.
Good evening, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde, and welcome to Steppin' Out. Each week we try to provide some analysis and commentary on the local arts and entertainment scene, and tonight we have with us Tom Fitzmaurice, publisher of New Orleans Menu and restaurant reviewer for WWL
Something in my eye.
You know, some things never change. Ralph Adamo is with us, and of course he is a local author who covers the book scene for us. Hi, Ralph. And Roger Green, art columnist for the Times-Picayune. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Peggy.
And Al Shea, entertainment columnist for Gambit and New Orleans Magazine.
And we should point out Ralph Adamo is still around, and a teacher and a writer and a poet. And Roger Green retired, and then he moved on to Minnesota. We've kind of lost a little bit of track there. But anyway, Doug, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good.
Well, this is impossible to go back 35 years and talk about the big moments in the art scene, but we'll do our best. Peggy, in 1986, there was no Julia Street. Of course, there was a Julia Street, but there wasn't a Gallery Row. It wasn't until the late 80s that we started seeing art galleries appear there. I think Sandra Russell Clark's photography gallery was the first to open on Julia Street, followed soon by Arthur Roger, Simone Stern, and a crop of others. Julia Street lent New Orleans the feel of a big city art destination. But to most people in New Orleans, the main benefit of Julia Street was that it became the focus of Art for Art's Sake and White Linen Night, the big street parties, some of the great street parties in a city that knows how to put on a party. I think another big moment in the last 35 years came in 1992, and that's when John Scott was awarded the MacArthur Genius Award. John Scott, arguably the most important artist to have emerged in that era. He was a Xavier professor that influenced generations to come. John Scott's work melded New Orleans black traditions with international modernism. He used, for instance, the age-old one-string diddly bow instrument as a source, as an inspiration, to make space-age-looking chrome sculpture. Just wonderful stuff. He used traditional patterns and color from African textiles in what would have been very austere steel sculpture. To this day, you can find his things, his works of art out in the city here and there, and they're still marvels. One of the things I mentioned earlier, he was such an inspiration. I saw one time John Scott using an asphalt smoother, a steamroller, essentially, to make enormous prints. That's how you influence future generations of artists. I think 1999 was another big moment in the last 35 years, and that's when the Ogden Museum opened. The establishment of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art added to New Orleans' reputation as an art destination. It added a third large-scale art institution with NOMA and the CAC. And with the World War II Museum, which started just the next year, it helped the Warehouse District become the tourist destination it is now. I mean, the Warehouse District, it doesn't probably rival the French Quarter, but pretty close. You know, it draws. One of the things that's so interesting about the Ogden is that in this 35-year era of mass communication and sort of a homogenization of culture across the country, here was the Ogden setting out to demonstrate what made Southern culture, Southern arts unique, and I think that's fascinating, and it sort of validated New Orleans' role in the country. You know, it wasn't all New York anymore. I feel. Like everybody else, Hurricane Katrina had an enormous role in the art scene, and I couldn't have been wronger. I was dead wrong. I thought that the storm and flood was going to ruin the art scene in New Orleans indefinitely. And for a short time it did, no doubt about it. But the surprise was there was a slingshot effect. It pulled back the art scene, and then it flew afterwards. Gosh, for some reason, Katrina made New Orleans seem even more attractive, even more alluring to people around the country. And sure enough, afterwards we had the Prospect One International Art Festival exhibition popped up. St. Claude Avenue Art District popped up. The rise of the Carnival Foot Parades, Chewbacca's and all that came about. The arrival of Banksy and the street art scene that followed. All of those things you can trace. The
and
music
of course,
box.
The Besthoff Sculpture Garden, one of my favorites.
Absolutely. In 2019, it was updated. It originally started in 2003. And it is an amazing 90 artwork promenade through the park. One of the great things about it is that it's very inexpensive. For a long time it was free, and it kind of broke down the museum walls, if you know what I mean. You didn't have to go into the space of the museum in order to encounter this art. One of the great gifts to New Orleans.
Yes, thank you so much. And now we have a close-up view of a Steppin' Out t-shirt that featured cartoonist Bunny Matthews' favorite couple, Vic and Natalie. And Bunny did a weekly cartoon for our show in the early years. I just love his great style. And over to you, Alan.
Well, you know, on our last anniversary show, Peggy, I talked about the demise of the dinner theaters, which we really don't have any longer, and also at that time a revival that was burgeoning along the St. Claude corridor. And within a 5-year period, the burgeoning arts along St. Claude has all but disappeared, and dinner theaters are still not happening. But I would like to give a shout out first off to Le Petit and Summer Lyric, who still managed to excel in all that they do. Southern Rep, of course, joined right after Steppin' Out had started up in the early 1990s, organized by Rosary O'Neill, and it's still here today. But again, sadly, others like Free Southern Theater and Dashiki Theater are now gone. But I did want to take a look at the actual brick-and-mortar theaters a little bit that are still standing, part of our rich history here. And while it isn't necessarily known as a theater venue as such, the first one I want to go back to and look at is what we now know of as the Morris FX Jeff Municipal Auditorium, mostly known as the Municipal Auditorium for so many people for so many years, the sites of so many carnival balls and concerts. I remember as the home of the Shrine Circus and of course the New Orleans Symphony Home. And as we know, Hurricane Katrina put an end to its public usage. The auditorium and 3 administrations have failed to be able to get it restored or renovated for the past 15 years, hopefully one day in the future. Several old-line movie theaters like The Joy, you know, that we see here in its opening in 1947, they changed from being a house of cinema to a house of theater in recent years. Here's The Joy with all the permanent seats torn out in more recent times. This is where Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was seen in 2013, directed by Tommy Myrick. And of course, taking over as the home of the New Orleans Opera and the post-Katrina site for all the touring art national tours, Mahalia Jackson Theater for the Performing Arts. A record, by the way, was established for the national tour of Wicked in 2013, which played at the Mahalia Jackson for 3 weeks. And then, in the fall of that year, New Orleans had been waiting for it to happen. The Saenger Theater, the jewel of the New Orleans downtown theater district, reopened with the national tour of the Book of Mormon. And again, with 2,600 seats, the Saenger is larger than any theater in the Broadway district of New York, one of the largest venues in the country. Of course, many remember it when it was a movie theater or its sister theater, which was the Saenger Orleans, which occupied its balcony space. But it was beautifully restored back in the late 1970s, first by E.B. Brazil, an oil man who fell in love with it. Later, it suffered, of course, catastrophic damage due to Katrina, and it was reopened and brought back to its former glory and became the home of the Broadway Across New Orleans series. Of course, it was designed by Emil Weil. Now, a lot of people know Emil Weil as the designer of several synagogues in town, but Emil Weil actually designed 7 of these theaters for the Saenger brothers in the 20s, all across Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and the Panhandle of Florida. Meanwhile, let's talk about some of the other things that are going on past the vaudeville area. We want to talk about the Orpheum Theater. The Orpheum Theater, of course, is now the home of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra. It was reopened 6 years ago, and one of the few vertical hall designs from the vaudeville era. Here I see Bob Carr and I after the Morgus show that we did with Sid Noel in 2019. It also served for the memorial service for Dr. John. And while we're on the theme of influential theaters, after Hurricane Katrina, let's talk a little bit about Le Chat Noir. It was a cabaret performance space originally, the brainchild of Barbara and Biff Motley. Le Chat Noir, though, became so much more than that, a home for several Ricky Graham shows. It introduced us to New York cabaret performers like Andrea Marcovicci, who you see here, along with Karen Akers, Cynthia Owen, local stars like Leslie Castay, Amy Alvarez, Lisa Piccone, and Anais St. John. It also hosted the Stora Boone Awards. And then it closed, unfortunately, after almost 10 years. Mid-City Theater sprang up to replace it, run by Fred Nucia, with Sue Gonzi reprising her role running the box office that she had at Le Chat and also running the lights. But it joined another list of theaters that have gone away, like the Shadowbox, Old Marquet. Then, of course, now we've got our Seth Rudetsky series that we have to thank Mark Cartoli for bringing down to the Noka Theater that we have. Here we see Sutton Foster and Seth performing, but so many stars from Broadway: Beth Level, Patti LuPone, Christine Ebersol, 6-time Tony Award winner Audra McDonald, who we see here. She's been down to New Orleans 3 times because of that. Again, Rivertown Repertory replaced by Rivertown Theaters for the Performing Arts. We mentioned them as well. And of course, the newest theater, the BB Stage Door Canteen, as well as JPAS's Jefferson Performing Arts Center on Airline Drive, and their Teatro Wego and West Wego Performing Arts Center. By the way, here is Ricky Graham still going strong, along with Sean Patterson in the center and Jefferson Turner there on the left. Some of the great people still performing, along with the Queen of New Orleans Theater, Janet Shea, seen here in the Tennessee Williams Theater Company's production of The Milk Train. Doesn't stop here anymore. Sadly, we had to say goodbye, Peggy. Just so many great performers, including, of course, Ty Tracy, who did such a great job at Nord, Stocker Fonalo, Arthur Tong, and Gail Batt, who was a mover and shaker that we should mention at Le Petit as well.
Thank
and
you,
then Carol Sutton recently.
Absolutely.
We mentioned her as well. Lying in State, like Ty Tracy at Gallier Hall.
And we
all of these
appreciate
people.
Anthony Bean's efforts over the years, too. You all, we could have gone on and on and on here. Thank you. We've got to end it pretty much in half an hour. And thank you so much to our underwriters over the years. Thanks to Sharon and David Snowdy, who were there in the early days, George Matulik, and our WYES crew, and to you for watching. Good night.
Rouse's is proud of the creativity and the unparalleled entertainment in New Orleans, and honored to highlight it with their sponsorship of Steppin Out on WYES.